Hey everyone, how's it going? Azren the language nerd as always. And in today's podcast, we have a guest yet again. So today we have Katrina. Katrina is someone who follows my blog, my Substack blog. So if you don't follow that, then please go do so. I'd really appreciate it. If you just search, actually, I'll put a link in the description box. So you guys can go find that. And so Katrina and I were emailing back and forth, and then one thing led to another, and here we are doing a podcast together. We don't know each other that well, and so we'll get to know each other a little bit. And basically, we're just going to compare and contrast our views on language learning and nerd out a bit on language for the next half hour or so. So, Katrina, welcome.
Thank you so much. This is kind of exciting.
For sure. So maybe a good place to start is what languages do you speak and or are you learning right now?
Yeah, my native language, I guess my native languages are Norwegian and English. So I was born in Norway, and then when I was 2, we moved to the US. And so I was young enough that English became a native level language for me. And then we moved back to Norway when I was 11. And at that point, Norwegian was definitely not a strong language. It was a home language. I understood when my mom told me I had to go to bed and brush my teeth and eat my beans or whatever. So at 11, I relearned or sort of gained my footing again in Norwegian.
I see.
So those are my two main languages. And then when I was 19, after I graduated from high school, I moved to France and lived there for 7 years. So French became a sort of use. I was perfectly comfortable living my life in French, but I never actually studied it. I didn't do anything explicit to learn it.
Mm.
And now I'm learning Thai.
Wow, very cool. What part of France were you in?
I was mostly in Paris.
Mostly in Paris. Okay. In Paris or
Yeah.
near Paris?
Banlieue. Yeah, a little bit of both. I moved around a lot. I lived in 7 years. I think I must have moved, I don't know, 14, 15 times from little
Wow.
studios to shared
Okay.
apartments to, yeah. Um, so I was in various parts of actually in Paris a few times, and then I was in banlieue, like outside of Paris a few times, and then for a year, I was actually down south in in and near Nice.
Got it. Do you have any interesting stories from places you lived in since you lived in so many?
I mean, it was so this is late 90s, early 2000s. And I don't know that there are any interesting stories about the places. I feel like mostly I came in not knowing anything and just had no idea what I was doing and therefore made poor decisions or just kind of random decisions a lot. A lot of the places, like the first little apartment I had, it was, I don't know, seventh floor, no elevator, typical tiny little top floor apartment. There was supposedly a kitchen, but like the first week, the 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 fuse in the stove blew, and I couldn't figure out how to get it working. And it took like 2 months before the owner actually helped fix it. So it was really weird. There was no toilet. There was a shared toilet outside. It was a very typical Parisian apartment.
Mm.
I lived in a lot of places like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember because I spent about over multiple trips, trying to remember something like 6 or so months in France over primarily I would say over two trips, maybe three. I did like 3 months in high
Yeah.
school, and then I did a chunk during university. I did a university semester, and then I went once as like for like anyway, it's not important. But when I was
Yeah.
doing my university semester, we were staying in like a student housing, like a student residence.
Right.
And that was my first time staying not in a house in France. Because I
Yeah.
was with family the first time I'd been. Or when I went as a child, as a child as well as a tourist, we stayed in hotels, but it'd be hotels, not a student residence. And I
Right.
couldn't
Yeah.
believe, I just couldn't believe how small it was. Like it was
Oh, yeah.
tiny. I think I could, if I were to, if I put my hands out sideways, I could touch both walls. I think the
Yeah.
bathroom, I couldn't even do that. And they somehow put a bed and a desk to work at in such a tiny place. I had like a desk
Yeah.
that could work. I had the bed and the bathroom. There's like a little entryway where I can like little entryway. I think there might have been at least some hooks to hang up jackets or whatever. It was
Yeah.
tiny, but yeah,
Yeah.
couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. But okay, so then you speak French, you speak Norwegian, you speak English, and you're learning Thai.
Yep. Thai. Yeah. And I did actually spend a few years trying to learn Korean with varying degrees of success. So we could probably talk about that as well.
We can we can probably bond a little over that. I'm guessing. So how was your experience learning Korean? Because I also have a funny learning Korean story. What was it like learning Korean?
Oh my gosh. So the problem with learning Korean was that it was the first time ever in my life that I was going to learn a language on purpose, and I had no idea what I was doing or like what worked for me or what I liked. So I went into it thinking, okay, uh, flashcards, right? So I found a flashcard deck and spent a few months doing that. Like I think I read what's his name, Gabriel Weiner's book, Fluent Forever, and he's super into flashcards. And so I made
Yeah.
a flashcard deck. And then after like 3 months worth of that, I was like, okay, so now I know words. I can tell you what sewing machine is in Korean. What do I do next? And I couldn't like I had no idea. I had no clue. So I started looking at like what the internet said, and that was the most overwhelming thing ever. I was like, I don't know. I tried talk to me in Korean, but they all they do is speak English and then tell you one tiny drip of how something works. But then it's like so much English that I don't even feel like I don't know, I couldn't get anywhere with that. And then I tried, um, what else did I try? I tried doing Italki lessons.
Oh
I
yeah.
signed up for Italki lessons eventually, and that was really good. Like I started getting a little bit of a sense of a language, but it was a lot of kind of random hard work. Like
Yeah.
it didn't feel like it was coalescing into anything. And so I think I spent uh, several months trying to do Italki lessons without really feeling like I was getting anywhere. And then I stumbled across there was a video by a guy named something Brown. He's a teacher in Orange County, California, and he had learned Arabic in a year using like various TPRS like um, approaches, just one-on-one with tutors and language exchange partners. And so I thought that was really interesting. His main thing was like bringing pictures to a tutor and having them describe the pictures. So I
Mm,
tried that with Korean. I found a tutor on Italki who was willing to do it. She didn't know much English, which was kind of perfect. And so I spent a year like doing one lesson a week maybe with her
mhm,
in Korean, just with picture descriptions. And that felt like it was actually working. Like
mm,
it was like a breath of, I don't know, fresh air. I felt really relieved because it felt like the language started actually making sense in my head. Um, and then she got a real job and had to leave, like quit her tutoring, and I couldn't find another tutor that I actually liked to do the like picture descriptions with. So I didn't quite know what to do next, and then I stumbled across Matt versus Japan
oh
and
yeah.
his whole sort of mass immersion thing, which
Mhm,
had lots of good ideas. And so I did. I sort of just started watching dramas hours and hours a day, and this was right around when the pandemic started. So I spent most of like the first lockdowns just watching Korean, and I think for like over a year and a half, maybe I just watched a bunch of dramas in Korean. And it was kind of fine. Like I understood more and more over time, but I never really got to the point where I felt like I could use it. Like I could watch a
mhm.
drama and understand what was going on, but I don't know if I could. I don't know. Maybe if you
Talk
dropped
about
me
maybe
in
you could,
Korea and I
yeah.
had to,
Because
maybe I
often
could.
people that have never actually not never, but often people that let's say haven't really been in an environment where they had to communicate, like for example, being dropped in Korea.
Yeah.
I've met quite a few, and often when you talk to them in whatever language it is, they're quite surprised that they actually can communicate quite well. So you might be
Yeah,
okay
interesting.
after all that study. I thought maybe you studied it for very like a few weeks or something or a month, and then for
Oh
some
gosh,
reason
no, it was
maybe.
like 3 years.
Oh wow, yeah, you probably have at
Yeah.
least somewhat of a base in language, I would think. After all that, I
Yeah.
would think.
Yeah.
Like my
The one
Korean
thing that I
lasted
did
two
in
weeks.
Korean that, oh, sorry.
Oh, I just said my
Go
Korean
ahead.
lasted like 2 or 3 weeks. That was it.
Ooh, so what was it? Tell me more. Oh, what happened?
Basically, I decided. So I was working on a self-study curriculum, which I have now, and it's good, but anyways, it's another story for another day. I was working on like a self-study curriculum. I wanted to create a program that, if someone wanted to learn a language, a curriculum that would work for any language, like a language learning program that would work for any language as long as it's a living language, essentially.
Right.
And probably not an endangered language, although it could probably work well for an endangered language to an extent too. So I was working on this project, and I wanted to test out a few things that I'd put in this program. And so I was like, well, let me pick some languages I don't speak and let me myself use this program that I've been making to see what it feels like, right? Because so I
Right.
decided to learn some Japanese and Korean. And the thing about me as a language learner is I obsess over pronunciation. I have to sound perfect,
Ah,
like or near,
yeah.
like so. Basically, if you were to close your eyes, you don't look at me, I want you to think I'm a native speaker.
Yeah.
So when I speak in
Yeah.
French or Spanish and
Cool.
such, like people generally won't know that I'm like near perfect or perfect in pronunciation, basically. Right? I can settle
Right.
for near perfect, but it has to be really, really good. And in and for Korean, I was struggling with some of the sounds, and I just got so frustrated with it that I just decided I was going to
Yeah.
stop and maybe revisit it later. That's how frustrated I got with
Yeah.
it, actually. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Some of those sounds are really subtle in
mhm,
Korean.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That makes sense. Okay, cool. So, yeah, I I think you might be I kind of yeah, you might be right that if you dropped me into Korea, South Korea somewhere, and I actually had to use it, I might be able to get by.
Yeah.
Mm.
My hunch would be yes. That'd be my
Yeah.
hunch. You said something interesting, actually.
So have oh,
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. You first.
have so do you have a lot of experience working with people like do you see a lot of heritage speakers who understand a lot and can't speak or don't speak?
Yeah, quite a bit actually. I see that quite a bit because with heritage, and I think I have a good theory as to why it happens. I used to always wonder, how is it that someone could understand, let's say they grew up with the language, right? Like a heritage language,
Yeah.
and they understand it to a very high level. Because there are some people understand
Right.
it somewhat. Like I have a cousin, for example, who understands Gujarati kind of well, but it's not like she understands really well, right? But some people, they
Right.
understand very, very well. Like you can just throw something on TV and they're going to understand 90% of it. And you're like, whoa, but they can't speak
Right.
a word. Like they literally couldn't put a sentence together. And I used to always wonder, how the heck does that happen? How could they understand so well? And I think I have a theory because I have a young cousin now. He's 4. But when he was younger, when he was like uh, 2, 3, let's say, well, what happened is he mostly lives his life in English, but there are some
Right.
family members that speak to him in Gujarati, and that he gets to be in this Gujarati environment. So what would happen is often people would talk to him in Gujarati, but because he lived more of his life in English, and that might come first, what would happen is he would reply in English. Like, or maybe he would
Mm.
do some weird mixture. Like I remember he would sometimes take Gujarati words, but do it with an English grammar. So he would say something like,
Grammar. Yeah.
yeah, I think he was like looking at birds outside. And I think he said it was something to the effect of, oh, look at the bird. It's udiing. And or uding or something. Because uru is to fly. He's like, oh, look, it's uding. And we're like,
Right.
what? What's it doing? Look, it's uding. We're like, it's uding. What's uding? What does that mean? And we're like, oh, like, and we had to think, like, oh, right. But generally
Yeah.
speaking, they reply in English. So I'm like, oh, I think that's what must happen is that they grow up in an environment where they have a lot of that heritage language, probably more than my cousin has. He has some, but not a ton. But they probably have a good amount, but
Yeah.
they also have a lot of English. So what's happening is they're being spoken to in whatever the heritage language is. And from a very young age, they're replying maybe in the heritage language, maybe in probably more in English or a mixture, probably more in English though. And so
Yeah.
that habit sets in really early. And then by the time they're even 5 or 6, it's set where that's how
Yeah.
it works. They hear the language, English reply. They hear the language, and that just becomes normal. That's my current running theory. It could be wrong, but that's my current running theory.
Yeah. And so to actually activate, like to switch the mode so that they could respond in the other language, have you seen any successful examples of that?
Well, with my cousin, for example, what I used to do, now it's hopeless. He just does, he knows his level of English is so much higher than his level of Gujarati that it's this wouldn't work anymore. But what I used to do is I used to actually just my cousin didn't know for like 3 years that I spoke English when they're really
Right.
little. So he would sometimes say
Yeah.
something to me in English, and I would look at him like he's speaking like some alien language. I'd be like, huh? Huh? And just like gives a blank look. And I'd reply in Gujarati like, oh, I didn't understand by saying Gujarati. Or I'd keep talking, right? And he would then look at me and you could see his brain think and go, oh. And then he would say it in Gujarati. Oh yeah, that guy doesn't speak English.
Right.
Oh yeah, he doesn't. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And so he would that's what happened. Right. Or sometimes as he got a little bit older and his English was a little bit higher than his Gujarati, and sometimes I knew he didn't have the level to say what he was saying. What would happen is
Yeah.
he would reply in English. I would still act a little confused, but then I would say things like, I'd be like, oh, and I would rephrase it a little bit in Gujarati, and I would kind of coach him into saying it, and then I would kind of look at him like, is that what you meant? And then he would say it back, like, oh yeah, yeah, and then
Right.
he would say that, and then that's how it would work. Now it's not possible anymore because he just speaks English perfectly fluently, and his Gujarati is gone, essentially gone.
Yeah. 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 In Korean, I'm really comfortable responding in English. Like I have a couple friends where we would have conversations and it was just like hanging out with a friend. Like they could
Right,
they could just speak in Korean and I would speak in English because their English comprehension was
quite
was
high.
perfect.
Yeah.
And so they didn't have to struggle with listening to me in English. So it was like there was nothing forcing me. There was absolutely nothing that was going to force me to switch to Korean because I can't trick myself. I know they understand English.
Hmm. I know for Portuguese, so I can speak Portuguese poorly, but I can't just speak it. Like if we just start talking Portuguese now, I couldn't do it. But I understand it. Brazilian Portuguese, I understand reasonably well because I spent time in Brazil when I was younger, and I made this friend that didn't speak much English, and I didn't speak any Portuguese, and somehow we just decided that we're gonna teach each other, and we were like both 14 or something.
Yeah,
And over lunch, I was
that's
there for
awesome.
soccer training. And at lunchtime, he would show, I don't know who this kid was, but he'd show up to the soccer training camp. He'd sit down in front of me. I'd have my lunch. He'd have his little notebook. And like we would try to teach each other. So with that, and then I used to watch MTV videos and I was doing some self-teaching basically for Portuguese. That was a long time
Yeah,
ago. But now because of that, uh, and my Spanish background, I understand it reasonably well. And but when I have to speak it, it's a nightmare. But the few times where I have been able to speak Portuguese is when I had someone in front of me who was patient and I was like, hey, look, I want to talk to you in Portuguese. It might take me like 2 minutes to say one sentence. So I need to like sit here and like think and try and think back to how I've heard people say that and see if I can put it together. And then I might ask you for feedback if that was right or if there's something I should have tweaked because I'll borrow from Spanish if I don't know how to say it. And then
right.
they understand,
Yeah,
but it wasn't right. And so when I was
yeah,
doing that, we had a nice 45 minute conversation entirely, well, maybe 90% Portuguese, 5% me borrowing Spanish, 5% me asking questions like, how do I say this? But mostly in Portuguese,
Mm,
we spoke for like 30, 45 minutes.
that's nice.
So,
Yeah, so it does seem like it's mediated somewhat by need, unless you're the type of person who is perfectly comfortable just throwing yourself into it, maybe.
mhm. Need is, I don't know what you think about this. In my perspective, need can go one of two ways. Need can either mean people figure it out, or need means people hide and they don't figure it out and they just block themselves off
Oh,
in the situation. I've seen that. I've seen that with some people where they just quite literally don't leave their room. Quite not even exaggerating. They just don't leave their bedroom
wow.
and they just sit in their bedroom. I've done that myself,
Yeah,
actually. I've done it myself.
yeah.
I'm too
With
scared to leave my
language
room.
specific
Oh yeah, yeah,
situations,
yeah.
do you think?
Yeah, I don't leave my bedroom.
Yeah,
I'll be in a country
yeah,
and instead of like going out, I'll like sit in my room and like watch YouTube or whatever. Like I'll have to convince myself just to open my door to leave because it's like
yeah,
so intimidating.
yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I think I mean I have to convince myself to leave my room, not necessarily just for language things though. Like sometimes it's just like any sort of unfamiliar situation
Sure.
takes quite a lot of activation energy. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. You said something interesting though earlier. You said something like you said you never learned a language, or rather Korean was the first language you learned on purpose
Yeah.
because so Norwegian you learned because you grew up speaking it, or rather you're born there and then
Yeah,
you
I heard it.
later.
I
And then
heard it as a kid, and when we moved back, my Norwegian wasn't very good, but they just plopped me in school, and I
right.
was kind
Yeah,
of
it's just
fine
figured
after a
out.
couple of years.
And then when
Yeah.
did you start learning? When did you go to France?
When I was 19, so just after I graduated from high school. And I went there, I didn't know any French ahead of time, and I wasn't really planning on learning French. I applied to a theater school, like a physical theater school. So I didn't need to speak because it was all physical theater, it was ballet, modern dance, acrobatics, fencing, various
Yeah.
types of theater, like physical expression. And so all the classes were group classes. The instruction was in French, but I could look at what my peers were doing to figure out what was going on. And then outside of class time, I just hung out with, you know, the other students at school. And I just didn't say anything. I just listened until eventually I was speaking. And I can't remember, I have no idea like what the process was like because I just took the path of least resistance. At some point, I ended up speaking. Like after 2 years, I know that I was speaking comfortably. I could do anything I needed to in my life in French, but I have no recollection of like what it was like. At what point did I actually start speaking? I don't know.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, it's very
I didn't
interesting.
try to read. I also didn't try to read at first, unless it was like a bulletin board, like the messages at school. I would read
Hmm.
them, or like posters or whatever. But I didn't pick up a novel until I I was comfortable understanding spoken French. And then at one point, like probably about 2 years in, a friend of mine said, "Oh, I just read this novel. I think you might like it." And so I borrowed it and read it in French. And it never even occurred to me that that should have been hard. It was just fine.
Hmm. Right. So you almost um you just went to France, you engaged in an activity that you enjoyed that happened to be in
Yeah,
French, and
yeah,
you didn't exactly need the French to do the activity per se, because you can look and see what
yeah,
others are doing and copy them. And by being in that kind of environment, you just absorbed it.
yeah. It just kind of worked.
I think that would work. I think that would work so it would work for people that can get over, that don't feel anxious about the fact that they don't understand what's happening around them. Uh,
Yeah, that's one of my strengths, I think. I'm totally chill with not knowing what's going on around me. Or I just I guess a lot and I'm comfortable assuming that my guess is right until proven wrong and
mhm.
just go running with it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yep. I think that would work very, very well in that case. I know when I was in Brazil, for example, we were there for some soccer training, and our trainers were all Brazilian. We even had some Brazilian kids that trained with us too that didn't speak any English. And so our trainers would they would talk to us in English if it was like individual, like if he was telling me something, but if he's talking to
Right.
the group, it might be in English and it might be in Portuguese. It would just depend. And all the
Yeah.
warm-ups, everything was led in Portuguese. It was just led in it. We just had to follow along. And I remember when I came back from the trip, I must have been older than 14 actually, because I must have been 15. I must have been 16 actually, now that I'm thinking of it. I must have been 16 because I was taking a Spanish class. Yeah, I was probably 16 actually. And I was taking a Spanish class at the time. I remember going to my Spanish class in high school and all my Spanish was gone. Like the little
Right.
Spanish I had, which was not very much, was all gone and replaced by Portuguese. I couldn't count in Spanish anymore. I'd count in Portuguese.
Yeah.
It was so odd. It was really weird over like 3 weeks or two or 3 weeks,
Yeah.
just gone.
Yeah.
And again, there was no explicit instruction. All there was is being in that immersive environment. There were some Brazilian people that trained with us. We would hang out with these Brazilian kids from time to time, and they didn't speak English. We don't speak Portuguese. And
Yeah.
I told you that one guy I had lunch with he would kind of teach me, but it wasn't like we taught. It was more like we just tried to talk and figure out how to communicate without having languages in common. And I'd like
Yeah.
point stuff like water, water, oh, yum. And he'd be like, oh, and then he would tell me water in Portuguese. And then he would show me his book and point at stuff and ask me in Portuguese what stuff meant. And I'd be like, oh, that must mean, what does this mean? Or whatever. Like, and we would just sort of
Right.
do it like that. But here's
Yeah.
what's funny, like I ordered us a pizza. That was the epitome, the what's the word, epitome, epiphany, the what's that word, like the highest
Epitome?
epitome, right? Yeah. That was I was like, it's not epiphany. The epitome of my Portuguese ability was me calling a pizza place and ordering pizza for my soccer team and getting, roughly speaking, what I thought I was ordering. Like
See, that's
the
pretty
pizza that
good.
showed up was, they looked at it and there's like one with olives, and I think we definitely not ordered an olive pizza, but we generally got what I thought we ordered. um and that was like the highest achievement that I had while I was there. But what's interesting is, despite all of our team having roughly the same environment, no one else learned. The only thing, I think the only word others learned was meninas, means girls.
Right.
Because there's like a stupid joke among all these, because a bunch of guys, right? Like, oh, it's the girls, and the stupid joke that we had.
Right.
And but no one else picked up the language. I was the only one who did. So I was the group interpreter.
Wow. Wow. So okay, so everyone was in the same environment and only that's
Yeah,
wild.
all of us, exactly the same environment, same training sessions, same teammates, same trainers. The only difference might have been that I was interested in learning some.
Yeah.
They maybe didn't care, which is a big difference.
Yeah.
Although maybe not, because you weren't particularly interested in learning French per se either, right? Um,
I wasn't disinterested either. Like
hmm,
I like languages and I liked languages even as a 19-year-old, but I wasn't making explicit effort to remember what things are called or like look things up. I had a pocket dictionary. I opened it once and then I tried to use it like I needed to buy a stamp and I looked up what stamp was in my dictionary and then went to the taba and tried to buy one and they had no clue what I was saying, of course, because I was reading it the way I would read it in Norwegian and not in French. And so
hmm,
that was a like colossal failure and I decided that my dictionary was useless and I was not going to try that again. So I think it wasn't that I wasn't interested, it was just that I wasn't making an explicit effort to memorize or learn or study.
right. That's probably where we're different too, because I was there. I wasn't exactly studying per se, but like I had a pocket dictionary as well, because I was pre-smartphone and all that. So I had a pocket dictionary as well. Or maybe it was a phrase book. I can't remember if it was a dictionary or a phrase book, something like that. It's not important. And but I would actually like think about, I would like an active thought throughout the entire most of the day would be things like, I wonder if that word that the instructor just said means this. Oh, I heard that earlier. I'm gonna go home and look at my dictionary, see if I can figure out how to spell it and find that word. Then I'd like flip through and like, I
Oh,
wonder if it's that word. No, it can't be that. I wonder if it's that one. Oh, it must be that word. Oh, so that means that letter makes this sound. I wonder if that letter makes this sound. Okay, I'm gonna listen to people talk,
nice.
figure out if that letter makes that sound. Oh, that's a word I know. I think it has that letter. Go to my book. Look. Oh, it does. So that means that the letter R, when it's at the beginning of a word, it must make an H sound. Oh, I see. Oh,
Right.
double R's aren't rolled. And like I still remember, it still haunts me to this day, me walking into a fast food place, ordering a Coca-Cola with no ice. And I don't know what I said, but whatever I said was so funny. She had to call all her, the worker, the cashier, had to call all her friends over and make me say it over and over just to laugh at me. And I got Coke with ice. So whatever I was saying, they knew I wanted Coca-Cola. They knew I wanted without something, but they wanted me to say the word ice. And whatever word I picked up in the streets for ice was not the word for ice. And
Oh
to this day, I'm
gosh.
like, I wish I remember what word I was saying.
Yeah.
And I wish I remember, yeah, I don't know, but I remember like saying it over and over and they're laughing at me. He's like, okay, this is clearly the wrong word.
But communication success, you actually got your Coke, so.
Yeah, but you can't drink
um,
the tap water, right? In Brazil. So I couldn't drink
Oh,
it. That's why, because the ice, I
oh
wasn't
no.
sure what they used for the ice.
Oh yeah.
So I just threw it out. I didn't drink it.
Oh, shame. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do recognize that the process of like wondering, oh, I think maybe this means this. I do that all the time. Like 100% of the
Mm.
time. Oh, oh, I think that means this, and then I'll be aware, or oh, I've heard that before, and now it's the same context. It could maybe my hypothesis is right. Ooh, my hypothesis is definitely wrong. It can't mean that because
Mhm.
I just heard it in a context where that wouldn't make sense at all. So I do that a lot.
Ah, that's very interesting. You know, I had a conversation with oh, this you've just helped you I need to thank you. You've helped something clunk nicely into place in my brain. So I did a podcast with someone just yesterday, actually. She teaches Russian, Spanish, and English at my business. And we were just comparing and contrasting our default ways of teaching and learning and such. And she said she was talking about how she's someone that when she learns a language, maybe the polar opposite of you. Maybe this is the polar opposite. She really needs to understand the system and exactly how it works and where everything comes from. What's the etymology? What's the grammar rule? What are the like? She really highly analytical approach. In fact, my Latin and biblical Hebrew instructor who speaks like 6 or 7 languages herself, she's also that way too, and she speaks all of her languages at a very high level. So it's not like this is her
Right.
approach and it's not effective. No, no, no. She's done it many times,
Totally
and
works. Yeah.
for her it totally works, right? And then yesterday, I was talking to Catherine and she's like, and I was telling her, I was trying to explain something to her. And basically what I was trying to explain is what you just said now. It's that wonder factor. Like even when I teach, I want to structure the class in a way where the student bumps into something and goes like, whoa, hang on a second. Wait, I thought that word meant this. Wait, is that, huh? And then
Yeah.
they wonder and they wonder like
Yeah.
that, did I have it wrong? Is that right? Like that wonder factor.
Yeah.
That's what I try to I really like to use that as a teaching strategy. And I
Yeah.
think I also use it a lot as a learning strategy. I like that. I wonder if this is how that works. I wonder if blah 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 blah, right? Whatever it is you're wondering.
Yeah.
And you're learning, you're letting like the wonder lead your studies. Because
Yeah.
that's a really big thing that leads my studies. Like I know how to say stupid things in Japanese because of that wonder factor. Like I know how to say, oh
Yeah.
look, it's a chicken. Only because I
Yeah.
can say, oh, look, it's a chicken. Or I can say, oh, no, the crystal broke. Or I could say, like, all sorts of
Yeah.
stupid things. My crocodile ate a snake. I could say all these
Yeah.
really stupid things. But they were partially led from, actually entirely led by wonder. Like, I wonder how I would say, I think I know how to say a fisherman caught I used to know how to say something about a fisherman catching a fish with a net. They say something like that.
Right.
But anyway, but yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it's my primary learning strategy is wonder, but I don't wonder about grammar.
Me
That's
neither,
what I
actually. Yeah.
noticed. Oh, you don't? Okay. Because I don't wonder about the system because I don't really care about grammar. If it I want what I really want is for it to sound right or sound wrong. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm listening for things to hear how it sounds when people say it and that's what's going to sound right. And
Mm-hmm.
then I want to have heard enough so that when I say things, it's gonna sound wrong to me if I say it wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're pretty similar there. I don't the only time I wonder, do I wonder about grammar? I'm gonna think about that afterwards. I'm not sure, but I think it's sometimes I can remember a couple times in particular where I've wondered about grammar, although it's not so much wondering, it's more I get frustrated.
Mm.
because I start to notice a pattern, like in Gujarati, for example. Like I grew up with the language, the heritage language, but I was in India I was in India for 2 months trying to learn Gujarati properly. And I remember there's a point where I realized that there were multiple there were multiple words for each pronoun. There's more than one.
Yeah.
In particular, I was struggling with, like, the one in particular I was struggling with is the word for I. And I remember thinking, like, wait a second, there's something weird happening here. When I say I want whatever, like I'm drinking tea versus yesterday I drank tea versus yesterday I met my friend, not only is the word for I changing, but everything else in the sentence does not match what I think it should be. Like I keep saying these I sentences
Yeah.
completely wrong, and I can't. My brain wasn't figuring out what to do about it, and I was getting very
Yeah.
frustrated because I'd go to say it, and I'm like, I don't know how to say this, and I kept getting it mixed up. I try and remember, like, okay, when I want to drink tea, I'm just gonna say that. I was trying to remember like individual sentences, and yet I couldn't do it. So that was one time
Yeah.
in relatively recent history that I was frustrated. I'm not sure if it's wondering. It's more than wonder at that point. Because wonder is
Yeah.
like, oh, I wonder, and it's almost positive. This was like,
Yeah.
hey, wait, something's going on here, and this is really frustrating, and I can't figure
Yeah.
this out. Like, there's something wrong, and I don't know how to fix it. And so that was something where I had to sit down, and basically what I did was I wrote down like a whole. I didn't have a teacher that understood grammar, really how to teach, to be honest. Was not the
Mm-hmm.
strongest teacher, at least how she taught me was not how I like to learn. At least let's just say that minimally. And yet we
Right.
had 6 hours that I was with her 6 hours a day, 6 days a week for 2 months, which is a lot.
Yeah.
So what I did
That
was I
is a
wrote
lot.
down like a whole bunch of sentences, and I just had I showed them to her. I was like, hey, can you just tell me which ones are sound right, which ones are wrong? And she'd be like, right, 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 wrong, wrong. She would just go through them.
Mm.
And then I'd be like, okay, so, and then I'd be like, okay, what would be the right version? Would it be this? And she'd say, yeah, 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 we get that all right. Then I go home and be like, okay, there must be a pattern here. There must be something I'm not
Right.
seeing.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one of the few, but no, generally speaking, I find myself wondering, I'm thinking out loud now. I think I find myself wondering, um, how to say something and not, I wonder what the grammar rule is.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. Like, how would I say that? And then that might lead me to a little bit of grammar, maybe. Right?
Right.
Like, oh,
Yeah.
that sounds like that word. Oh, I wonder if there's a pattern there. Oh, I wonder. There must be some pattern there. Oh, there must be something with a at the end of words in French, for example. Oh, that must be
Right.
something in the past. Oh, a is kind of past. Oh, okay. Yeah, there's probably something there. Okay, and move on.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because I remember wondering about a thing that is, I guess, technically grammar. Like in Thai, there was a word that I kept hearing where I was wondering a lot about like how it fit in. And
Mhm.
then one day I realized, oh, I wonder if it's reciprocal. It means that the thing that is going on is reciprocal. And like mind blown, it totally worked. Like I was hearing it over and over again, and for the next few months, I kept like every time I heard it, it was like, holy smokes, this actually might work. It might actually mean that it's reciprocal. And like now, I guess a year later, it I haven't found a counter example, but I haven't asked anyone and I haven't looked it up. I'm just um like it makes sense that it's reciprocal. There every example of it that I've heard, and I guess it's grammar, but
Mhm.
don't necessarily I don't worry what the system is. I just want
Yeah.
to know what it means, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder, I'd be very curious, if when you speak, for example, maybe French is the best example, maybe Norwegian, but probably French is better. I wonder when you speak in French, like if you were to go take an exam where you are graded on not just your ability to communicate, but also the grammar, I wonder to what extent your brain had actually slotted the grammar incorrectly into your mind.
Yeah.
I want to almost like write down everything you said, be like, oh, that's actually wrong. That's actually, but they understand,
Hmm.
of course. I wonder.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I would be curious to know. I mean, I can't write at all in
Hmm.
French because I write the way I listen,
Right.
which is like just not a good strategy in French.
Hmm.
Also, I mean, oop, I just lost my ear thingy. There are actually two ways in which can't write in French. Like the first is just spelling. I spell phonetically. Like
Right.
I mean, if it's a word I've seen a lot, I'll know how it's spelled, but mostly it's not. Like I
Hmm.
haven't read a lot in French. But the other thing is that you don't write French, like the register is completely different in French. And so writing in French, like if you write any sort of formal letter, like
Hmm.
any sort of letter, anything, even not very formal, the register is completely different. And I
Right.
don't know the register. It's just
Okay.
not familiar to me. There are so many like forms that you have to know, ways of saying things that are the correct way of saying it or like writing it. And I
Hmm.
just don't know those.
Yeah, I remember there's a guy that I met once. He took Spanish lessons for maybe I don't know, like a few months or something. Um, and he learns languages in a similar fashion as you. Like he speaks Russian. He's learned Russian. He speaks Spanish very, very well. He speaks English, obviously. And he learned Spanish in a very similar way that you learned French, kind of through this immersive process. And he'd wonder a lot, same kind of thing. Like he'd want like, how do I say this? And he'd want to like talk to people. He's very extroverted. He loves to talk to people.
Oh yeah.
And when he spoke in Spanish, he had this like near perfect pronunciation. He understood anything, almost everything you tell him. He could say almost anything he would want to say, almost anything, right? So very, very high level. Um, but he had he had small mistakes in almost everything he said. Almost everything he
Hmm.
said had small errors, but they were never big enough
Yeah.
to limit comprehension. Which, to be honest with you, for like most language learners, who cares? It doesn't actually
Yeah.
matter, right? For most people,
Yeah.
it was like small, not even major errors, like little errors, but everything he said had little errors. Everything he said had
Yeah.
small, almost everything, little errors. But you can communicate with him, no problem. He can say anything he wants to say. He understands almost everything you say to him. Like it was the reason he's taking lessons is because he's like, I think I make a lot of mistakes, was basically what he was saying. He's like,
Yeah.
I think I mess up
Yeah.
a lot. And I'm listening, I was
Yeah.
like, you do, but it's never major, but you do. And so he wanted to like clean up his language in a
Yeah.
sense, right? Because he again,
Yeah.
he because of how he learned, something very similar to you, like no one's ever enough. French is a little different. They can get they love to debate over their grammar and stuff, but still,
Yeah,
like
they
you're
do.
not generally people are not to be like, oh, you said you pronounced that like this, or but that makes it sound
Hmm.
like this tense where that might lead to no, they're just gonna be like, I know what you mean, and just off we go.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, yeah. I never had people being like pissy with me about how I
Hmm.
was speaking French. They were always super generous
That's good.
and like welcoming. I when I was living there, now I haven't spoken French in like 20 years, so
Wow.
my
Okay.
French I don't even know if I could speak it still. I can understand it because I see the occasional movie and it's fine. Like I still understand it just fine. But I was mistaken for a native speaker on a fairly regular basis
Hmm.
for a while. Like there
Cool.
was always some they would always say, but I can't quite figure like where in France are you from?
Hmm.
And then after a while, we'd end up on a topic where there was vocabulary that I didn't know, or idioms that I was unfamiliar with, or just like cultural knowledge that I didn't have.
Right.
And so it would always be obvious. And I mean, I never tried lying and telling them that I was French because there was no point. Like,
Yeah, it's crazy
I
how
was
how
told
that
them
can
I was,
happen, right? It's really interesting because
yeah,
like I had that because I've spoken French for 25 years. I did
yeah,
all my schooling in French. I did a French and Spanish major in university. I studied in France twice. I teach French. I revisit France regularly. Like it's a language that's it's been a part of my life my whole life.
yeah,
And the most recent time when I was in France would have been 2019, I think, if I remember correctly. I was visiting a friend that I've known for 15 years, and we're at his parents' house. That's where when I first went on my French exchange trip, I lived in that house in the tiny, tiny, tiny village in the middle of nowhere.
yeah.
And we're sitting there watching TV, and he's like, "Oh, Azren, you have to watch this show." I said, "Oh yeah, what is it?" He's like, "Yeah, I'll show you." Puts it on the TV, and we start watching it, and we're watching, and I was like, "Dude, I understand like half of what they're saying,
Oh no.
half maybe." He's like, "What?" I was like, "I don't understand them." He's like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "What?" So it's like a sketch comedy show, and there's like different sketches.
Yeah.
And I was like, "What was that word? What did he say?" He's like, and what turned out was that it was they're basically parodying, I guess, a lot of medieval French.
Oh,
What
yeah.
they're doing is they're using modern French, but they're making fun of I actually don't even really know what the show's about, actually.
Right.
But it was something like parodies of medieval French, because all he'd explain what they're saying is like, oh, that word is a really old word for this word. I was like, oh, okay. He's like, so
Oh,
because he
yeah.
said that word like this, it's funny for this reason. I was like, oh, I see, ha ha ha. And then I'd laugh like 30
Right.
seconds too late. And but it's so funny that yeah, there's always so native speakers have will always have this passive knowledge that's
Yeah,
way higher than
enormous.
from almost any learner, unless they like live there, breathe the language, they work in the language,
Yeah,
they friends, they're like it's truly their life, that then
yeah.
maybe not. But if someone like me who lives in Canada, English part of Canada, like they're
Mm,
even though I've had 25 years of French, their passive knowledge is just more than mine. So when they watch a show like that, even though they never use the words they're using, perhaps, right? They all know what they
mm-hmm.
mean. They all understand the references. They all know the jokes. They all know. But
Yeah,
when we watched a play we watched this classic Molière play,
yeah,
that I understood like a good 75 or 80% of 70,
yeah,
75. Because I'd done a French education, so a lot of what we learned is very literary and such. So we'd read and heard that type of language.
yeah,
So after the friends like, you probably understood nothing. And I was like, actually, I probably understood like 70, 75%. He's like, really? Because I probably only understood like 90. He's like, the stuff they said, I was like, because it's like a Shakespearean sort of thing sometimes,
yeah,
right? And he's like, I
yeah,
probably understood 90, but there's some things I was like, huh? And I was like, yeah, this is a few things. I kind of wrote them down. And then I kind of asked him. But he's like,
yeah,
wow, it's funny, right? Like your experiences will shape what you can understand. And then they always have a native speaker will always have more passive knowledge
yeah,
than someone like we would.
yeah. So I wanted to ask you about um, pronunciation. You said that you're obsessed with
Hmm.
getting, or like it's very important to you to
Yeah.
sound near native
Hmm.
or native like.
Hmm.
How do you approach it?
So, um, first of all, I've studied phonetics, which really helps. I've done a lot of phonetic study, formal phonetic study, so through university setting, and also
Does that mean that you study like the where things are articulated, how the
yeah,
mouth is shaped, that sort of thing?
how the mouth works, what are the types of sounds, where can the tongue go. We used to in my phonetics classes, we would practice sounds that exist in other languages. We would actually practice what is the theory of, and our professor could do it. He could be like, well, look, in
Right,
African languages, they have sounds like this. These are called this. So here's the mechanic. Step one, okay, hold your breath.
right,
Step two, say a T sound, but keep the air blocked off. You're like, okay, and you're like, oh wow, that's a
right.
cool sound. What the heck is that?
Yeah,
Like, well, that's this letter, and then they write in the International Phonetic Alphabet, right?
right.
And they would teach us stuff. So that was one. Um, Also, just understanding the mechanics. Some I would call it speech language. What's that word? Speech language. What's the P stand for in SLP? Speech language pathology, pathologist. The people that help kids that can't pronounce things, they help them learn to pronounce things.
Oh yeah, I think they
Like
are speech pathologists.
yeah,
Yes,
speech
speech
yeah.
language pathologists.
Yeah, so then
Yeah.
learning a little bit some concepts that they use when they're teaching. So for example, understanding that if you can't pronounce a letter, it doesn't mean you can't pronounce that letter. What it means is you might be able to pronounce that letter if you change where the letter is in a word, or you change what letter precedes or comes after. And you can probably diagnose a problem more
Right.
minutely. That's something I lucked into learning, actually. I just lucked into the fact that when I was in high school, the family I was living with, my exchange student, he could have probably been a speech language pathologist if he hadn't gone the career he went into. He figured out how to teach me R's in French because I couldn't pronounce them. He figured out, okay, you probably should say je crois first because CRs are going to be easier than other letters because a C is in the back of your mouth, R's in the back.
Oh,
So that's going to be easier.
puts your tongue in the right place.
Yeah. And he's like, but then he made me say théâtre. He was in theater. He was in a theater group. And théâtre
Yeah.
is harder, two syllables, and then TRs. You're moving from the tip of your tongue to the back of your throat. It's harder, right? So understanding certain
Yeah.
rules like that, which I was lucky to learn at a very young age, that concept of oh, right. Sometimes you can actually get your mouth to say things because it sets your mouth up in the right position, right?
Yeah.
Lots of practice, like obsessing. Like I couldn't roll my R's in Spanish. Like that took me like 3 years to learn, at least, maybe four. like
Yeah.
actual 3 or 4 years of
Yeah.
trying to learn to roll my R's. Um, that's something like actual. I used to practice in the shower, and like daily in the shower. Like French
Yeah.
R's, like je, crois, je, I would like literally do that in the shower while I was showering, like shampooing my hair, je, right?
Nice.
So lots of practice in the shower. Even a basic phonetic understanding goes a long way. I would only sometimes I only learn one word at a time. Active
Yeah.
listening very intently when people are speaking to how they pronounce a sound, trying to copy them. Um, just an obsessive amount of attention on pronunciation for years. That's all I do. Because as I get better and more advanced in the
So
language, my pronunciation also improves.
so what do you think happened with Korean? Like why did you decide to put it away for a bit?
I think it might have been so it was very frustrating. It was very frustrating they couldn't figure it out, which does happen. I do get frustrated when I can't figure sounds out. I
Yeah.
know that. But I think I was also frustrated because my teacher and I had an internet lag. And so I would
Oh,
say something and then like it was a slight lag on everything. I think that was
yeah.
probably looking back, I think that was a piece of it that I couldn't. She would say a sound, I would try and copy it, but when
Yeah.
I copied it, she might have said it a second time, but because of the delay, we said our sounds at the same time. So then I would say the sound again.
Yeah.
While I said it, she would say, "Oh yeah, that was good." And then she might hear the second time and go, "Oh, that time not as much." And I was like, "Which one was?" So I think we
Which
had a
one
slight
was
delay, which was
yeah.
annoying. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that was slightly annoying. I was testing a way to learn a language that I'd never done. I was testing a few things. So I think that was new for me as it was. So that was also kind of new. And I was realizing kinks and mistakes. And so I think the whole experience was just,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it just
Yeah.
wasn't conducive to, yeah, but anyway.
Do you ever do the thing where you record yourself and listen? Someone told me that they do that, where they
I
record
have,
themselves.
but I don't do it a ton. I've done it, but I don't do
Yeah.
it a ton. Usually what ends up happening is there's a point where I think that I'm speaking really well. I'm like, I think I've got this. And then I start to ask native
Yeah.
speakers, like, hey, what do you think of my accent? Like, what do you think of how I speak? And I'll start to ask. And they can't
Yeah.
diagnose like a phonetician would, but they can say
Right.
things like, like you'll get something out of them. You'll always get some insight. They'll be like, "Oh, you're really good, but we know you're not from here." Like, okay, there's still something wrong.
Yeah.
They'll say, "Yeah, you
Yeah.
you say some of your words kind of funny." Like, "Oh, like what words?" "Oh, you say like I don't know." Right? And then or like, "Hey, it's really good." Like, "Yeah, but do I sound like you?" And they'll be like, "Well," and then you kind of see like, "Okay, no, there's something off," or right?
Yeah. And so can you get them to specify which words so you then can take those
Depends on
words
the
back
person.
to a
Depends on
teacher
the
work
person.
with?
Some
Yeah.
people are really good at that, and some people stink at
Yeah.
that. Depends on the person.
Yeah.
Like in Gujarati, I noticed when I was in Gujarat, they all said the same thing, which was really weird. They all said, "Your pronunciation's perfect, but we know you're not
Oh,
from here." And I was like, "How the hell could you know?" I was like, "Grammar mistakes?"
yeah.
And they'd be like, "No, no, no, not grammar." It's like, "Do I say like things that are kind of funny sounding?" No. So how do you know? I was so shocked. I was like, "That's new for me. How can you have perfect pronunciation?"
Yeah.
Not really making like mistakes in how you speak or fumbling on words, like, and yet they know it. Like, how could that be? Isn't it just pronunciation, grammar, words, wording, like put those together, that's you sound native? It's like, how could that be? And they all said your tone's off. I was like, my tone is off.
So
What the heck
it's
does that mean?
intonation as in tone?
Yeah, I think what it was is, I was talking to someone maybe a few weeks ago, and I was talking about the art of pronunciation. So there's the science of pronunciation and there's the art of pronunciation. The art of pronunciation is something like you speak in a way where um it's like this is very difficult to explain, but sometimes you can. I have a friend who speaks who has a francophone father, French his whole life, French school his whole life, perfect pronunciation. He can say everything in French perfectly. And the second he opens his mouth, he's not a native speaker, even though it's all perfect. And it's because
Hmm.
there's a style of how he's speaking that isn't right. The he used wasn't the the French people would use. The pause was a little longer than what a
Yeah.
French people would pause. Like his body, he said,
Right.
he said je ne sais pas. He said je ne sais pas and
Oh,
not
je sais
sais pas.
pas.
He
Yeah.
said, or maybe he
Yeah.
said like, I don't know, like there's something else he used to do. He would never go, and if for people that are watching on the podcast, right, like, and they don't know what that is in French, means I don't know. Like it means I don't know
Yeah.
in France. But like he wouldn't do that. Like, and those are all tiny things that are like more the art
Yeah.
of pronunciation. And I think I was missing like the art. Like
Yeah.
maybe someone would come in and they like in the restaurant, like maybe I don't know, like and I can't even think of any examples right now in India, but like it was the art of pronunciation that was off, right? Which
Yeah.
is very subtle things. And
Mm.
those things, like my brain, like I'm someone who really can break things down into minute steps for anyone and for myself. I can break anything down to very small steps. So I can break those little things down. I can be like, oh, I need to, I'll think in my head, think like, oh, I need to put air in my mouth and blow it out instead of saying je sais pas or je sais pas. Okay.
Mm.
And I'll just like practice. Actually, I wouldn't practice that, but I would like on purpose do it to watch if people's reactions are weird and like,
Mm-hmm.
and that's like more the art.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Super interesting.
yeah.
And you help people with this as well?
If they're interested, yeah, some people find it excruciatingly frustrating because they don't like to
Oh,
focus on such minute things. But yeah, for sure, I love it. It's my favorite. It's my favorite thing
yeah.
to teach. My favorite
Yeah.
thing to teach. I love teaching. That's my favorite thing. Like if I were to start a separate business, I'd call it like Azren's business to teach. Like I don't know, like learn French R's with Azren. Like that would be my business. So I can teach anyone a
Yeah.
French R. I can teach someone a French R in
I
5 minutes.
might I might I might hire you for that. I have no idea if my French R is good. Like, I mean, I haven't used it for 20 years, but yeah,
Yeah,
I would totally hire you for that.
yeah. There's like two R's. There's like two different R's in French. People don't realize. There's two R sounds. There's and there's also another one which is like something like that. Like in garder, you don't say garder, you don't say garder, you say garder. Gar.
Garde.
The
Yeah.
sound is right. That's the sound. It's not
Yeah.
or, but in croix, it's definitely in like roi, it's definitely but it's not.
Yeah.
It's not roi. That's weird. That's not the word.
Yeah.
It's roi, right, with a nice rumble. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool.
Well, I need to probably I'm gonna stop this recording here. So guys, thanks for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I have something else to start. Well, I have to get ready for jujitsu. I have jujitsu class later today. So
Nice.
thanks for being here, Katrina.
Thanks
And
so much for
any
having this
tiny
chat. It was
yeah,
super
any
fun.
parting thoughts?
Oh, I want to be better at pronunciation and all of that
Hmm.
nerdery.
Okay, well
Yeah.
hang out for like I'll stop the recording, but hang out, don't leave the Zoom, and then we can quickly
Okay.
chat. So all right, everyone, thanks for
Cool.
listening. Au revoir.
Bye bye.